Thank you all so much for tuning in today. I'm so excited to dive into this topic alongside you all. So, first off, a bit of background information on our host. Lori is the founder of A Big Idea, which is a brand strategy studio in LA that works with founders, early and growth stage startups, and social enterprises looking to find community in the lifestyle, hospitality, wellness, media, and impact spaces. She has over 8 years of experience working with large brands, media companies, startups, and social enterprises, working to craft, execute, analyze, and optimize their marketing strategies. And ultimately, Lori and her strategy studio are on a mission to bring undeniable ideas to life by helping their clients uncover their most impactful brand positioning, content strategy, and effective copywriting, and more. So thank you so much, Lori, for taking the time to host this call today and share expertise with us. We know how valuable your time is, and we're so excited to learn from you.
I love that. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks everyone for joining. It's so awesome to be able to do this call. I joined Dreamers and Doers in like February, I think, and so almost sort of perfect timing because COVID sort of hit right after, and it's been so awesome to be a part of the community, to be on calls like this, to attend them, and then to connect with a bunch of you. So I really would love for this call to be as informal as possible. I have a short overview on brand positioning. I'll walk you through the framework that I use, and then share a few additional points. But beyond that, I really want this to be a time where we can all just kind of talk through any of the questions that you have. As specific, you can get like as specific as you want. That's really sort of the purpose of this. My philosophy when it comes to brand building is that like each individual's brand is going to be unique. And so with that, the challenges, the questions, everything that comes along with it is also going to be unique. So yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen, but definitely feel free to hop in with any questions, or we can spend time at the end running through it as well. Hannah, it looks like my screen share is disabled.
Let me make you a co-host.
Okay.
Okay, you should have control now. Yay.
Perfect. Everyone can see? Awesome. So since you just did such a great job with that intro, I won't spend too much on this slide. Like Hannah mentioned, I run a brand strategy studio called The Big Idea. We work primarily with early stage businesses, mostly I would say consumer focused, but sort of in the spheres of product, tech, and then impact. In my former life, I spent time in brand marketing at Sony and MasterCard, then did a 3.5-year stint at Nielsen, where I really sort of built expertise around consumer insights and really understanding why people watch and buy what they watch and buy, and kind of started on my own entrepreneurial journey 2.5 years ago with some freelance work before launching A Big Idea last year. I included a little note on what I've been doing to stay sane. It's remarkable that it's been six months since COVID kicked off, but for me, being able to do all this other stuff is what has allowed me to stay sort of inspired and creative in the business. So yeah, I've been cooking, taking walks, started a new meditation practice. I went adventuring in Wyoming last week. So if anyone ever wants to kind of chat about safe COVID travel, I'm here for that. And then I've been spending time with family. I'm actually right now at a coffee shop on a street corner in New York, which I didn't think I would be able to do, but it's happening. So if you hear any sort of loud sirens, just let me know if you didn't hear something, and I'll repeat myself. But hopefully we should be good to go. All right. So to kick off, I wanted to share a little bit around my philosophy when it comes to brand building. So I would say you want to think of your brand as a playground. Building a brand is really fun, and so I like to kind of come up with analogies that make it kind of feel that way. But what I mean by think of your brand as a playground is if you imagine a playground, there's usually a few things that stay in the playground, like your slide, your swing set, you know, maybe a jungle gym. These are things that are there throughout time. They're well worn, they're not changing. But what makes the brand unique and grow and change and evolve over time are the people that come in, the toys they bring in, the sidewalk chalk around it. So, you know, even though there's these things that don't change and it might be known for, oh, that's the playground that has, you know, XYZ slide, what's built around it is a community of people that are making it dynamic and are helping it grow over time. So when I think about what a brand is, it's really sort of not just the elements, the core elements that kind of are ever changing that people tend to recognize and know you for, but really the elements that allow it to grow and change, and really allow it to be as relevant in 100 years as it is in like year 1 or 2 when it first sort of launches. So with that sort of thought process in mind, I want to kind of take you guys through my brand building framework. So like I mentioned, I work primarily with early stage brands in crafting the foundation. So the bulk of this presentation is sort of geared towards if you're in the early stages of launching your brand, or if you're at the point of having an idea but you want to bring it to life, what are the things that you need to pay attention to, and how do you go about building that playground? So we're gonna be spending time on that, but I think it's also sort of applicable if you are, you know, 3, 5, 7 years into running your business. It's also a really great opportunity to kind of look at this framework and say, how can I gut check around like what I started with and where I'm at now, and use the framework as a way to sort of look at each of the things that may be the same, that might have changed, and think about it a little bit sort of more holistically. I feel like a lot of the brand building exercises usually come at the early stages of your brand, and then you think, you know, things are good to go, and you're less likely to pay attention to as you build. But it's super important to come back, I would say, sort of every year, and make sure that your brand is still growing in the way that you want it to grow. So without further ado, we'll be talking through what I call a brand exploration framework, and what that means is your brand's positioning, your brand's personality, and then how you express it. So how that brand comes to life through the positioning and the personality. So to start, I always like to say there's 3 inputs when it comes to building a brand, which I think is overall like a bit of art and a bit of science. But the 3 main components are the story, the market, and then the community or the user or the client or whoever it is that you're interfacing. So to start, your story or your vision is really, you know, they talk a lot about, you know, start with your why, like what's your vision, what's the reason you're doing it, what's the story behind why this particular thing belongs in the world at a given time. Your market, so this of course is where exactly your brand is going to fit. So that could be looking at competitors, it could be looking at the overall market size, and then it could be looking at something that I think is less talked about, which is the culture at large, right? So there's so many reasons a brand can succeed and the brand can fail, but a lot of times it can come down to timing, and it can come down to culture, where the culture is at, and whether the market was ready for the product that you're offering. So super important to pay attention to. Trucks passing by. Super important to pay attention to those 3 things when you're thinking about the overall market. So again, like, what's the competitive landscape look like? And the reason why you're paying attention to that is 1, to kind of see what's out there, and then 2, when you're creating your positioning, say, okay, how are they talking about this product, especially if it's in a crowded landscape, right? Like, you don't want to release a product with the same positioning as another brand in your market, because it sort of nullifies the purpose of the brand. So paying attention to the competitors, paying attention to the culture, paying attention to the overall sort of market size, market prospects, that sort of thing. And then, of course, finally, the community. So who are you talking to? Who is your end consumer? What do you want them to get out of it, of the product? What are their pain points? So usually I recommend doing a bit of research both into the market and into the user before you go about building any sort of brand strategy, to make sure you're not just telling your story with your why, but you're making it relevant for the audience that you're serving. That's positioning. The next piece, and positioning and personality is sort of married together to create sort of the expression of the brand. But the three inputs that go into brand personality are your sources of inspiration, right? So you as a founder, as a team, could be inspired by, let's say, for example, you're launching a cookware brand, but you're super inspired by space. I don't know, super random, but you wanna create a cookware brand that helps make food like out of this world. Just made that up entirely. But your source of inspiration is space. And so this could be anything. It could be nature, art, history, space, the sort of visual elements that'll help bring the brand to life, provide inspiration, and build and start to sort of clue in your audience to the lifestyle that your brand represents. So lifestyles on there sort of as the third bullet point. But I think, it's impossible to talk about brand building, especially consumer brand building, without talking about lifestyle these days, because so many consumers are taking their identity and they're attaching it to brands and to the way the brands express themselves, looking for lifestyle cues for how to aspirationally live their lives. So you want to be thinking about inspiration and lifestyle in tandem. And then the third thing that I think is a really useful tool to help get people talking about the brand and thinking through the brand in the same way is the brand archetype. So Carl Jung is a famous psychologist, philosopher, and he created the 12 brand archetypes. There's a bunch of quizzes on the internet you can use to kind of take a little quiz. It's almost like a personality assessment, but for brands, to sort of identify how your brand shows up in the world. So say, for example, or some of the examples are outlaw, ruler, caregiver, lover, magician. So really it denotes like all these different personalities into 12 core types that allow you to sort of identify, is the brand going to be really bold? Is it going to be more loving? Is it going to be, is it going to take on the personality traits of someone that's like an explorer who like sees the world differently? So what are the elements of that archetype that'll help kind of build the overall personality? So the final piece of this framework is the brand expression. So you want to think about your positioning and your personalities coming together to create the brand expression. So the key piece of that, and a lot of times if you work with an agency or you work with someone who's working on brand strategy, what you'll be left with is kind of the core messaging for the brand. So think your mission, your vision, your values, your points of differentiation, your brand pillars. These are the things that are going to solidify the foundation for your brand and allow anyone that interacts with you to understand who you are and what you're about pretty quickly. So if you think about some of the most iconic brands in the world, Disney, Nike, when you think about them, the same things, whether you ask me or you ask 5 other people, the same things will kind of come to mind. And that's really the job of the core messaging. It's done correctly. there should be really no difference in how in the way that people sort of associate the brand. So that's the main element of the brand expression, or at least the foundation of it. And then the other three sort of pillars here are, of course, your content and your channel. So really understanding your positioning and your personality will help sort of determine what kind of content you share, what channels you're sharing them on, that sort of thing. And then finally, I think one of the best ways to establish positioning these days is through collaborations. We're seeing them happening left and right. And collaborations done well basically say, you know, you have this and I have this and there's an overlap. How can we use our audiences to grow sort of together, but also to create sort of an identification point in your consumer's mindset of, oh, this, you know, this workout brand and this water bottle brand are like-minded in how they're thinking about the world, how they're engaging with their community. And so therefore, I want to be a part of that experience. So that should be the goal of a successful collaboration. And the more you do over time, the more it'll help kind of establish your place in sort of the world and help kind of build and augment that playground that we talked about earlier. So the next thing that we're going to do is kind of go through three sort of brand rules, I guess, or things that I like to think about and talk about at the outset with early stage branding, and then we can jump into questions from there. So the first thing that I'll say is different is better than better. And so many brands these days kind of run into this trap of trying to say they are different or disrupting or reviving or re-engineering or redefining or reimagining, which is a personal favorite of mine, and I'm guilty of overusing, but you know, I'm very sort of conscious of that and need to shift it. All you're saying there is we're doing something better, but you're not necessarily saying how. And so I always, when you're building out a brand strategy, you're thinking about your brand and what you do and what makes you who you are. I would always focus on different over better. And I'll give you sort of an example of that. So on the left-hand side, you'll see brand Sizzle Sparkling Tea. Their whole sort of statement is, this is tea revived. You look on the right, you see Olipop, which has been making a bunch of strides the last couple of years, and their statement is delicious sparkling tonics made with prebiotics, botanicals, and it's cut off, so I can't actually see the rest. The line is super clear in terms of what they're doing, why they're doing it, and you know what the purpose is, all in that one line. So again, really making sure that your brand is different rather than just saying, oh, this is better, because what that does is if you just say you're better, it creates opportunity for someone else to also come in there and say, we're better too. And so there's no ceiling to being better. But if you're differentiated and if you're different, you've carved out kind of a unique place of existence for yourself, no matter who else enters the market. The next key piece of insight is always be listening, especially if you are pre-product market fit and you haven't quite identified where exactly your brand fits within a market. You want to really pay attention to what are people saying about your brand, how is your community using your product, how are they positioning it to their friends and followers. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, as you know, there's certain foundational elements of your brand that are not going to change, that are going to stay consistent over time. But your positioning statement, the messaging you use, the way you get your customer to relate to it, that can change and that can evolve over time, especially as you build. So really pay attention to what your audience is saying. If your product is getting user-generated content, how is that being displayed? I mean, I think, you know, Glossier is always touted as the sort of best example of that really done right, where they got to a point where, you know, it was people in the comments on behalf of the brand answering, but answering correctly as if the brand would have answered questions. So if you're there, you're communicating with your audience, you're understanding what their pain points are, and you're noticing what they're doing and the hacks they're creating. It allows you to sort of create opportunities where, one, you identify new pathways for positioning, and two, you're sort of building out your like product development pipeline by learning what they want and learning what they need. So that's rule number 2. And then rule number 3 is build to last. And I think, you know, we're in a really interesting period of brand building right now, where the last 10 years really created this wave of direct-to-consumer brands, VC-backed brands that you know were encouraged to grow very quickly, but maybe they were sacrificing sort of the long-term view whilst doing that. So I have 3 examples on the side: so Away, Everlane, and The Wing, all brands that were, you know, prized as being these incredible success stories in brand building, who in the last year have run into some problems in terms of how their positioning has affected their overall perception. And so what I'll say here is, you know, when you create a brand, 9 out of 10 times you're creating something that's aspirational. You're creating a lifestyle that people want to live. You're creating something that you're creating that cognitive dissonance that allows the consumer to say, oh, I want to be that, like, let me reach for this. But if the gap between aspiration and reality grows to be too big, you then create this disconnect where consumers lose trust in your ability to actually, you know, feel like they can fulfill that aspiration. And this goes both for consumers and it goes for employees. So the way that I think about brands is it shouldn't just inform your design and marketing and your consumer perception, but it should be lived through everything that you do. So your hiring, your culture, your product development, your suppliers, your manufacturers. If there's kind of a through line through all of that via a strong brand foundation, you're setting yourself up for long-term success. But even if you set that at the foundation, it doesn't guarantee that all of a sudden everything's going to magically fall into place. So you have to kind of make sure you're empowering your team to gut check against what the brand stands for. Make sure you're bringing on people who can express the brand in a certain way, and to make sure you're evolving to meet the climate, but then also to make sure internally you're able to actually stand by the values that you're putting out into the world and actually stand by the aspiration that you're building. So those are sort of the loose framework for how I think about going about building brands, and then a few things to remember as you build and grow. I will say, I think doing these exercises, like I mentioned earlier at the start of the presentation, every year, doing that gut check to make sure your brand is still in line with what the foundation you set out is sort of the way to ensure that you are building to last, you are building something that resonates and that's really tapped into the overarching community. But I'm going to pause there because I think there's far more to be learned from your questions and your stories. And I really want to make this an open discussion. So yeah, Hannah, I don't know if we need to do anything to open it for questions or if people can just kind of jump right in, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second.
Yeah, so I'll just put us all on gallery view so you can have just a conversation. Everyone feel free to just unmute yourself or drop the question in the chat and then we can cover it as well. I have a question while people gather their thoughts. How
Sure.
important would you think it is to come up with like the perfect brand name, or like how significant is a brand name for a company?
That's a really good question. What I'll say about the name is the the story makes the name and not the other way around. I think it's important to have a name that's easily understandable, that it's easy to pronounce, and that doesn't feel like super overwhelming. But beyond that, I would say so long as the way that you're telling the story around the name, the way that comes through, is more important than the actual name itself. So you're seeing a lot of like, in the direct to consumer world, really simple words where they change like one letter in the word. And, like that's fine. And the purpose for doing that is to convey to the consumer, like this experience is going to be as easy and seamless as possible. We're going to make it super simple. It's easy to understand. But what separates a good name from a not so good name, I think, other than ease of understanding and ease of pronunciation, is really like, does your name make sense in the context of everything else? And if not, if there's a mismatch there, then that's where I would kind of pay attention more so to the name. But otherwise, I think really, so long as it's simple and easy to understand, your name can be anything really, so long as it makes sense in the context. A couple of questions in the chat. What's the biggest mistake you see young brands make? That's a really good question. I think, and this might be my own personal bias given what I do, but I think we're living in this world of this like Instagram world where how something looks is given so much weight. It's given so much weight. And so brands are pouring thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars into building aesthetically their brand, packaging, website, all this stuff, right? Unboxing, and what they might fail to do in the process, in focusing just on the aesthetics, is the actual foundation of the brand. So a lot of the stuff that we were just talking about, like what is the story there? Why does this product need to exist? What's the greater purpose of the product? I think one thing that I didn't touch on earlier, right, is not only do you want to talk about the functional benefit of the brand, but the emotional resonance as well. People don't buy things, they buy the experience, they buy the emotion, they buy the feeling, they buy the identity that comes with whatever you're selling. So, it's the difference between, like, if I go to, I'll say, I'm selling a fancy water bottle. If I go to a website for a fancy water bottle and it's telling me, this fancy water bottle is XYZ product benefit, but it's not sort of abstracting and telling me what's the purpose of this brand, why should I buy into this experience, what's the overall feeling that I'm going to get by participating in this brand story. I think, that's what separates the really strong brands who are able to do that, not just once on their site, but consistently through every interaction. That's really what makes sort of the best brands shine. And so my advice to young brands is really just like, make sure your strategic foundation is sound and that it's showing up consistently across all of your channels. Like, if I go to your website, it shouldn't look markedly different than your Instagram, than your, from a messaging perspective. And then the aesthetics, of course, are no doubt important. But I think I see too many brands these days focusing on, like, how do I make a splash visually on Instagram, and not what's really the purpose of my brand's existence. Do these principles apply to service as well, or mostly to product? I would say, so this presentation is definitely geared towards launching consumer product brands, but I think there's definitely elements of it that for sure apply to service businesses as well. So the way that you think about your positioning, your story, your market, your user, those three things are never going to change. The personality of the brand, the archetype, the inspiration, those elements are what's going to help define and differentiate and separate your brands. And I think so often you think about, industries that don't get a brand treatment, tech back in the day, service businesses, if you can start to think about your service business as something greater, of course, in a service business, they're likely buying your services. So where it kind of differs from a consumer brand is in a consumer brand, you're creating this larger playground where you're trying to build for something that attracts a wider consumer base. But if you're a service brand and you're maybe like a solopreneur, right, a lot of that is going to be tied to your own identity, your own expression of who you are and how that shows up in the brand and what makes you different and what makes working with you different. So for example, there's 1,000,001 brand strategists in the way that there's like 1,000,001 let's say like coaches, for example. But there's a place for all of us because the way that we show up in the world is different. And so if you think about the elements of the positioning and the elements of the personality that make you different and that make you unique, you can apply the same framework to a service business as well. Any tips or exercises you recommend for defining our brand pillars to core messaging or to guide core messaging? Yeah, so I think you could do, I always love starting with brand values. That is a really sort of helpful place to start, especially if you're leading a small team. Thanks, Anna, for the question. Yeah, so starting with brand values is super important. There's like a bunch of lists of values exercises as well. And another one that I really love is going through, like making a list of people, right? So people in your life or people just like general consumers, right? So a grandmother, a parent, a sibling, a friend, a stranger, like how would they describe the brand? Like if you said for the Mountainist, for example, like if they, how would a grandmother describe the Mountainist? How would your best friend describe the Mountainist? How would a coffee shop owner describe the Mountainist? And start to identify, if you're with a team, what elements sort of align with each, and then start to group them together. So I would group them in terms of vision. I would group them in terms of voice, and then maybe sort of aesthetic experience. So that's another example. The brand personality quiz that I was telling you guys about earlier with the archetypes, that's another really good one. I've been in some really awkward rooms with teams of 10 to 15 people who are working on building a brand, and we did that exercise and everybody took the quiz, and there were different archetypes. Each person got a different archetype on behalf of the brand, and that was our number one clue, that the way that people were expressing the brand was not aligned. And so we use that as an exercise, as a stopping point to say, we all need to get on the same page here, so that the way I'm writing copy for this brand is not different from the way that the next person is writing copy for the brand, which is not different from the way that the next person is writing copy for the brand. So really doing those types of exercises to make sure that you're resulting in something that is super cohesive, and to help you kind of get to your core messaging, why you exist, who you exist for. And then how do you manage seemingly very different sub-brands, in our case, one for teachers and one for students, without being confusing or inconsistent? So that's a really great question. You know, as you grow and have different product lines that are different for each consumer set, how do you think about what the thing is that is unifying the brand? So I would really sort of do an exercise to kind of determine what is the through line? What is that core thing? And I would have to know a little bit about the context to give a specific example for this brand. But yeah, what's the through line that exists for teachers and for students and what you're offering them? And then beyond that, what's the core goal, right? Like with whatever you're building, is the goal for teachers and students, is it, hang on one second. Shouting over a New York City audience, ambulance is never a good idea. How do you manage seemingly different sub-brands? So what's the through line between what you're offering for teachers and for students? And then secondly, is there some kind of emotional benefit or larger purpose behind your product offering that is consistent between teachers and students? So I would I would spend some time doing some talking to your consumer base in both categories, identifying what the pain points are and identifying how they're using your products, and create that sort of synergy in the messaging to say, we have these different product lines for different consumer bases, but overall, our education brand is about making education more accessible. And we do that through, our services for students, our services for teachers, our services for parents, whatever it is. And you guys can feel free, I don't know, I think you guys should have speaker access, so feel free to kind of jump in and chat to make sure I'm answering your questions, and we can also go deeper on anything if you want to. So I'll jump to Jesse's question in the meantime. Does that emotional sales perspective ring true for B2B brands as well? Or what would you modify if you're hoping to appeal to businesses? I think so. I think, at the end of the day, if you're a business to business offering, you're connecting with a person. There is a person on the end of your sales email, at the end of your pitch deck, who is asking the question, how is this going to make my life better? How is this going to make my life easier? What value is this providing? I'm overwhelmed, I'm overworked, and I don't have enough time in a day to think about, this new software that does XYZ problem. How is this going to help me? So I would always remember that at the end of the day, no matter how technical the product offering could be, you're going to be dealing with a human. So whether that emotional perspective doesn't necessarily ring through overall in like the brand messaging and in the super high level communication, when you're interacting with someone who's going to make the decision on whether or not to purchase your software or to purchase your business's services, I would always appeal to some degree of emotional benefit, some degree of like humanizing the brand. And I think that's where a lot of tech brands, a lot of software brands falter, is that they spend so much time, and because that's sort of what the best practices are, they spend so much time talking about the product benefits, service benefits, and whatnot, and less about like what really is the end goal, what's the emotional resonance, what's the human connection there.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then any tips on where to find some great examples of branding presentation or a brand book? That's a great question. I don't know of any good repositories, but I would say that if you have certain brands that you love that kind of come to mind, 9 out of 10 times there's plenty of thought leadership about that brand and how that brand was built. So you'll likely be able to find their brand decks,
I'll inject and say something here too. So most companies actually put it on, like if you look up like media or press page, normally it's linked there, or they'll put it like flat on the page. And then also if you go to like anything like Behance or Dribbble, you can see some really awesome examples of brand books that designers put up and just kind of showcase their work.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thanks for chiming in there, Jesse. For sure. There's plenty of thought leadership, and basically I would gear it towards the industry that you're in, and finding key examples of brands that kind of are in your sphere, and hunting down information based on that. I think I reached the end of the question list. Anyone else want to jump in, ask any deeper questions, or if anything else kind of has come to mind, I'd be happy to answer.
I have one more question.
Sure.
So I do a lot of branding, but I feel like I'm having a lot of trouble doing it for myself, because I feel like I'm running into the same problems that I help clients with, of like, I see myself in this, as opposed to being able to like remove that and just see the business. And so I was wondering if you have an experience with that and know kind of like a way around it for like clarity.
Yeah, my advice is to have someone else help you do it.
Yeah.
I think it's so hard. It's so hard to work on this kind of stuff for yourself, because the benefit of having an agency or a third-party brand strategist or someone like you come into, and you know this, come in is they're coming in with a fresh perspective. They're coming in with a 1,000-foot view. They're coming in that, you know, without the lived experience of what it's like to be you on a daily basis. And so my simplest advice is it's worth it to kind of, you know, it can be hard to sort of accept, like, if you're a brand, and I think this is advice for myself too, right? Like, if you're a brand strategist, this is what I do, like, how can I pay somebody else to do what I do? That's really hard and really scary. But I think it is, can be massively beneficial, because it sort of can help open up your eyes, and have someone else ask questions that'll help get you to think about things in a way that's different, or in a way that you might not have thought about before. And also it helps sort of, I think, on the other side, create empathy for your client as well, which I think is a useful tool, if you are a brand builder and you are doing this work on a regular basis, knowing what it's like to be on the receiving end of all the questions a brand strategist asks to get to what they need to get at. I think
I feel like I'm my own worst nightmare client. Like,
and I think that goes for all of us, right? And so I actually just had I did one of these sessions last week where a brand strategist that I know reached out to me in like March and was like, I need to reposition myself. I don't know how to do it. I'm stuck. But it took like 5 months for her to be like, okay, like, I don't actually think I can do this on my own. And I think there's no harm in bringing someone else in, because, you know, at the end of the day, it sort of re-emphasizes the worth that you think that brand strategy services can build and bring too, because you're bringing in that kind of additional perspective there.
Thanks.
Yeah. Anything else?
Kind of going off of that, but also in a more like general way, at what point would you recommend someone or a brand either DIYing their branding, or, you know, doing it themselves versus bringing on an agency? Like, what are some questions to ask to determine like what would be the best route?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think it sort of depends on a few things. The first and foremost, if you're still in the phase of pre-product market fit, or you haven't really launched your brand yet and it's just kind of idea stage and you're bootstrapped, then I would say pay really close attention, obviously, to the amount that you're investing into your brand. If you are venture backed and you go straight from idea to having $1 million in capital, then, you know, go straight to an agency. It depends on, for sure, depends on your resources. And then, you know, because what's interesting about agency or freelancer services is the range, right? It could range anywhere. You could pay anywhere from, like, you know, a couple $100 for a full visual identity to a couple $100,000 for a full visual identity. And that's a really large difference. So I think, you can have someone help you at the earliest stages, but I would sort of keep in mind where you're at, keep in mind the resources you have and what's likely to change. If you haven't figured out exactly where your product fits or what you want it to, what purpose you want it to serve, I would say spend your time and your energy and your focus on some of that strategy work. So whether you're doing that internally or whether you're hiring someone out to do it, I would get those elements in place. And then once you're kind of at a level where you feel more comfortable with spending, the thousands of dollars that it could take to build a really strong, like visual, strategically sound brand, then go ahead and sort of explore that. I think in some cases services are so inflated and agencies are charging what they want to because they can charge what they want to, because they have the credibility of like, oh, we helped launch this unicorn once upon a time 10 years ago. Like, so just be wary of that and know that there's so much creative talent out there for every stage and every level of brand building. And yeah, I mean, I think, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, I think there's always benefit to having someone else come in and ask the questions and to help put things into a framework and to help run you through that positioning. But if you're at the point where you're scrappy, you're starting, then go out there, put some positioning together based on either like the framework that we talked about earlier or any exercises that you kind of find online, and rapidly test. So testing is your best solution if you don't have the means for early stage brand building. And, so long as you have a visual identity that's clean and cohesive, kind of like the name that we talked about earlier, you're not going to lose out on that unless it's unless your visuals are fully amassed. The one caveat I will make is if you are entering a super, super, super crowded space like skincare, cookware, anything in beauty, like those industries, those markets are really, really crowded. And so a lot of times at the outset, branding is what will help make the difference.
Thank you. If there are any last minute questions, feel free to drop them or unmute yourself now. If not, Lori, I'll let you wrap up if there are no questions that come in.
Awesome. So this has been super great. I'm so glad that we got to have this conversation, and that I was able to kind of connect with you all in this way. Like, if there are any questions that you guys have, you can feel free to reach out. We're actually launching a hotline for founders, which I'm very, very excited about. It's launching tomorrow, but I wanted to give you guys the number ahead of time. The goal for this is really to help answer any direct questions without having to jump on fill out a Calendly form to jump on a call. So questions about brand building, questions about launching a company, questions about really anything. I would like it to be a service that really helps founders grow in whatever way. I think overall culture building is really important to me, and it's so hard to be an entrepreneur and a founder these days. So wanted to kind of create a tool that would be useful and helpful and answer questions as you build. So feel free to kind of make a note of this or follow along, and we'll officially launch it tomorrow, so you'll see it there. But yeah, if you guys have any additional questions or you want to chat offline about anything specific that's going on within your business, I'm more than happy to connect one-on-one. Like I said at the start, this community has been super awesome. So excited to kind of give back in whatever way I can. And I'm so grateful for you guys, joining and hopping on what day is today? Wednesday, on this Wednesday afternoon. And thank you, Hannah.
Of course. Thank you. This was so amazing. I'm glad we were able to really get into the nitty-gritty of people's questions. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It's always such a treat to be able to hang out virtually. This was recorded, so it will likely be shared as a resource, and definitely reach out to Lori if you have any further questions. Have an amazing rest of your Wednesday, rest of your week. Hopefully some of us get to have a long weekend for the holiday. And I will see you all on a virtual call soon. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.